history classroom. So we're going to talk about ancient and modern world history. So just to give you some background on why I'm here, who I am, and my teaching philosophy. I have about 50% of who I am comes from a ministry background, and then the other 50%, if you want to divide me evenly, is a history background. I was working on getting my master's in history while I was working in student ministries at my church in Pleasanton. And so being here to me is like a dream come true because it's my two passions coming together. So it's kind of unbelievable. I can't even fully accept it sometimes. There are just moments where I'm like, I can't believe this is really what I'm doing. I'm just so grateful. But I will have to qualify. When I say history, I don't mean the memorization of facts and dates. My philosophy is that if you can easily memorize something, you can also easily forget it. And that's not the type of history that I have ever enjoyed, nor is that a history that I want to impose upon my students. So my philosophy of history is more story-driven, project-based learning. So this is a quote that I really love. It's from Rudyard Kipling. He said, "If history were taught in the form of stories, it would never be forgotten." And that truly is what history is when it comes down to it. It's stories. They're all true stories. Or you could say interpretive stories. And I think that's really where the joy comes when you're telling a story of what has happened in the past. So what that looks like is in the classroom, my love of God and my love of history is really how I lead my students. And if I'm excited about history and if I'm excited about worshiping the Lord, they kind of can match that. And so whatever enthusiasm I bring, I can see it reflected in my students. Okay, so these are a ton of questions, but if you can see them, I want you to read a couple, see if you can answer them. Don't worry, I won't call on you. I just want you to think if you can answer them. If you can't see, I'll read a few. What makes Christianity different from all other world religions? Why does God allow genocides to happen? Is the Bible a collection of trustworthy historical documents? What should the Christian's role be in government if our citizenship is in heaven? When does God sanction war, and how can we know if he sanctions a war? How can we love our neighbor who has a different culture, socioeconomic status, worldview, language, etc. than us? What biblical standards for conflict resolution can be applied to the UN or to our nation? These are a few questions that just get me going. I love questions like these. And I have to say, I don't have a straight answer for all of these, and nor do my students, but it's something that we wrestle with together. And I find it a privilege that being in a Christian classroom, these are the sort of questions we can work through, that we can have a biblical worldview as we try to analyze the past, and I think that's essential. And so I really get a lot of joy from trying to wrestle through these heavy hitters with my students. So to be more specific, I want to highlight a few projects and activities that we go through in ancient and modern world history. And this list is actually not one that I compiled on my own. I tried to be a good historian, and I interviewed a primary source. I talked to a few students, and I asked them how they have seen the mission statement reflect in my classroom, and this is what they said. So they said that they're courageous when they do things like simulations. We just had one called the Enlightenment Dinner Party. They had to research a philosopher from the Enlightenment in the 1700s, and they had to go to a dinner party. We actually had food. They were in costume, some of them, and they had to debate one another and philosophize together. And try to trace themes from the Enlightenment to a revolution that they historically could have been a part of. They said that they were thoughtful when they studied the Reformation. They analyzed some abuses of the church in the past, and they tried to figure out what that means for the church today. We actually read the 95 Theses, like the literal theses that Luther wrote, which is pretty incredible that sophomores can say they've done that, I think. My students said that they're creative when they make their timeline assignment. That's the primary homework assignment in my class. A timeline is a synthesis of each unit, and they have to prioritize the key events from that era, but then they also have to add a fifth element that's their own personality. So if it's sports history or military history or science and technology, anything that's their passion from the past, they have to find that and bring that. It's not in the textbook, it's not from my lectures, they have to do it themselves. So their timelines truly are a creative expression of their own personalities, and then they can get really creative with how they physically even draw a timeline. I've had students make a Great Wall of China instead of just a line, so they definitely think outside of the box with their timelines, and I'm really proud of them. We're gonna skip leaders. I'll come back to that later. The next part that my students highlighted is being interdisciplinary. This is one of my passions as a teacher. Most recently, we worked on a project called the Columbian Exchange, where they had to chart a product from the Columbian Exchange, where after Columbus sailed, there was an exchange of products from the old world to the new world and vice versa. They had to choose one product, trace it to today, and use kind of a ecological footprint analysis of, is this a product that's sustainable to buy today? So that's a lot of different learning modalities, and they had to present it in the form of an infographic, which is really challenging technology. And I think that was a rewarding experience for them because they had to think beyond just what has happened in the past and really apply it to today. Skipping holistic, going to rigorous. I'm not sure how I'm doing with like bringing rigor to my freshman level class, but for my sophomores, we do document-based questions, which are actually AP level questions, and it's where they have to analyze primary and secondary sources, make connections between them, and then write about them. And then we also do a lot of MUN style negotiations, where they have to take the role of other people. That's definitely a rigorous assignment. And then lastly, the Christian piece of education. And it's ironic because they thought of the Islamic art project. The reason why they thought of that, they told me, is because now they know what it means to be a Muslim. Now they know the current events from the Muslim world, and so they can engage Muslims. They can earn the right to be heard, and they're ready to present the gospel to anyone in their life who's Muslim. And if they don't know someone who's Muslim yet, they will. They will. So that one was really cool to hear from them. So my goal, because I had 2 question marks on that list, my goal that I want to get a little better at this year is to highlight the holistic and the leadership pieces of the mission statement. And so I want to move toward more explicit leadership development. I think it might be implied through the way we run things in class and the things I ask of them and the way I connect with certain students, but I really want it to be more explicit, and I want it to include more students. There are students that I just easily connect with, and then there are others where I'm just like, I'm not there yet, and that really bothers me. I want to get better at connecting with those students. So what I'm looking for is a holistic approach, which in other words, I would consider that discipleship. Caring for the whole student, connecting with them outside of what we're doing in history. And so I thought about the relationships and the way that Jesus prayed, the way that Jesus hung out with people, the way that Jesus served people. And so the first verse I thought of for discipleship was John 13, the passage where Jesus actually washes his disciples' feet. And that amazing act of humility, not only does it show that he's willing to serve and be the least of these, he was also willing to spend time with his disciples in a relational way, hanging out, eating, doing life together. And I don't necessarily do that with my students. I feel like there are connections in the classroom, and I see them in the hallway, I see them after school, but I don't know that I'm serving them like I'm washing their feet or like I'm connecting with them on that individual basis that Jesus was just so amazing at doing. So that's my goal this year that I want to improve upon. And I found it really interesting that those are the 2 pieces of the mission statement that my primary sources did not bring up. So if you go back, that's why there's 2 question marks. They didn't mention those words when they were telling me how they saw the mission statement. So that's kind of what was on my heart anyway, and then they confirmed it. So that's really what I want to get better at. All right. Lastly, I want to talk about how world history really develops empathy. So I took the portrait of a graduate that was outlined by our school, and I was really excited because I think that most of those aspects of a graduate are, in fact, sorry, that's my timer. I'm wrapping up, I promise. Most of what we do in the history classroom really does serve to develop these characteristics because it's a mindset, and in that mindset of a world historian, you do demonstrate service by serving people that aren't yourself, that have a different background. And I won't read them, but this is from our portrait of a graduate. But the piece that I think is really exciting as we work together in our different classrooms, I think that this piece we don't control. The displaying courage and striving for intellectual rigor, I think that's the whole, like, can you actually motivate a student to actually want a challenge, like to want it? Can you build that desire in them? I'm not sure. And then to display courage, like I can't make a student be courageous. Like that's something that comes from within, and I think through the discipleship process of asking the Holy Spirit to lead our students in that way. But I think also that with all of these different aspects, we're really having our students fulfill the Great Commission to go out and make disciples of all nations, to be globally minded enough to be able to present the gospel to someone that has a different history than you do. So that's why I have a little heart with the world, because we love the world like Jesus did. All right, let me pray, and then you guys are free to have an amazing Friday.